Keanu Reeves was quietly sitting in a Taco Bell, hoping to go unnoticed, when he spotted a mother struggling to pay for her son's birthday meal. What happened next set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. But before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love heartwarming stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we have another special one just for you. The afternoon air carried a slight chill as Emily tightened her grip on Jake's small hand. He practically bounced beside her, his brown eyes gleaming with excitement as they neared the Taco Bell entrance. "Today's my day, right, Mom?" he asked, clutching his dinosaur-patterned backpack, a makeshift Christmas gift from last year. His voice was pure, full of joy, untouched by the harsh realities Emily wished he never had to face. "It sure is, champ. All about you today," she replied, forcing a smile while adjusting her bag. This simple fast food trip was the closest thing she could offer to a birthday celebration. With each step, Emily ran the numbers in her head, silently counting and recounting the cash in her worn-out wallet. How could she stretch these few dollars? The weight of guilt pressed heavily on her chest. She wanted so much more for Jake, but lately, all she had to give were empty reassurances and an exhausting effort to stay optimistic. "Will there be cake too, Mom?" Jake's innocent question nearly made her stumble. He looked up at her with a wide, toothy grin, the kind only kids can pull off, pure and full of hope. She crouched down, adjusting his jacket. "Today's your day, champ," she repeated gently. "But remember what we talked about? We could only pick one thing, and you chose lunch. It's going to be special, okay?" Jake bobbed his head, as if understanding, but Emily caught the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Okay, Mom," he said softly, turning his gaze forward. It broke her. As they walked, Emily watched her son, the way he jumped over every crack in the sidewalk, the way his face lit up over the smallest things. He was her world, her strength. But even the strongest foundations can crack under pressure. She thought back to how drastically life had changed 5 years ago. Jake was just 2 months old when his father walked away, unprepared for the weight of parenthood. Since then, Emily had faced loneliness, exhaustion, and the overwhelming pressure of being everything to someone so small. "Tired, Mom?" Jake asked, noticing her slowing pace. "A little," she admitted, squeezing his hand. "But nothing that'll stop me from taking you out for a special lunch." By the time they reached Taco Bell, Emily paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. She flipped open her wallet one last time, $6.45. Just enough for a kid's meal and a small drink. Jake's eyes lit up as he stared at the brightly colored menu inside. He pointed eagerly at one of the images. "Mom, look. A big taco. Can I get that one?" Emily smiled, pretending to consider it, even though she already knew exactly what they'd be ordering. "Of course, champ. Let's make this the best day ever." She held his hand a little tighter, more for her own reassurance than his. They stepped inside. Emily squared her shoulders, hiding her sadness behind a smile. What she didn't know was that in just a few moments, something unexpected would happen, something that wouldn't just make Jake's birthday unforgettable, but would change their lives forever. The warm, spiced scent of food filled the air as they walked up to the counter. The restaurant wasn't too crowded, a small mercy, considering how embarrassing it would be if she miscalculated her total in front of a crowd. Jake squeezed her hand, his eyes locked onto the giant menu board. "Mom, they have huge tacos," he exclaimed, pointing excitedly. Emily smiled and nodded, even though she already knew their budget only covered the simplest kid's meal. A young, distracted cashier greeted them with little enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, what can I get you?" Emily mustered a warm smile. "We'll have the kids' taco combo, please." She glanced down at Jake, his excitement still shining through. "And a small soda, right, champ?" Jake nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mom. And fries too." Emily swallowed hard. She crouched beside him, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. "The fries don't come with the combo, sweetheart," she explained softly. But the taco will be really tasty. You're going to love it. Jake hesitated for just a second before nodding again. Okay, Mom. His little voice was brave, but Emily saw the brief flicker of disappointment in his eyes. And that flicker, that tiny moment, crushed her more than any financial struggle ever could. But just then, before she could place their order, a voice from across the restaurant spoke up. And in that moment, everything changed. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in a Taco Bell, hoping to blend into the background, when he noticed a mother struggling to pay for her son's birthday meal. What happened next set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. But before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love heartwarming stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another special one for you. The cashier punched in the order and walked away, leaving Emily with a pang of guilt tightening in her chest. She wanted to say yes to everything Jake asked for, to let him have fries, a bigger taco, maybe even a dessert. But she couldn't. Not today. When their order was ready, Emily carefully carried the tray to a small table near the window. Jake sat across from her, his legs swinging happily under the seat, completely unaware of the internal battle his mother was fighting. She placed his meal in front of him and sat down with nothing but a cup of water. There hadn't been enough money for anything else, not even for herself. But that didn't matter. What mattered was Jake's happiness. "Aren't you eating, Mom?" he asked, frowning slightly as he unwrapped his taco. Emily forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm not hungry," she lied. "Seeing you happy fills me up." Jake studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand, then simply shrugged and took a big bite of his taco. Emily smiled back, but inside, she felt hollow. It wasn't just the hunger. It was the weight of knowing that even moments meant for joy came with sacrifice. As Jake ate, Emily noticed the quiet glances from nearby tables. An older couple looked at her with gentle kindness, while a younger, well-dressed woman gave her a cold, judgmental stare. Emily had felt this before, those mixed looks of empathy and quiet judgment. The kind that said, "I feel sorry for you, but also, how did you end up here?" She ignored them. Jake, blissfully unaware, chatted between bites about school, his friends, and his dream of becoming a paleontologist. "I'm gonna study dinosaurs, Mom. And when I do, I'll take you to see a real fossil," he said excitedly. Emily chuckled softly. "I'd love that, champ. I know you're going to be the best paleontologist the world has ever seen." She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that his future would be full of opportunity, that he would break free from the struggles that weighed her down. But at that moment, imagining a different path for them felt impossible. The overdue bills, the mounting rent, the never-ending cycle of scraping by, it all loomed over her like a dark cloud. But Jake was her light. As he finished the last bite of his taco, he looked up at her, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Now we can get the cake, right, Mom?" Emily's heart sank. She had been bracing for this question all day, but somehow, it still felt like a punch to the gut. Taking a deep breath, she forced her voice to stay calm. "Jake, remember what we talked about? We could only pick one thing today, and you chose lunch." Jake's smile faded. Slowly, he stared at the empty plate in front of him. "But it's my birthday," he said softly. So softly that Emily almost didn't hear it. Her chest tightened. She reached across the table, taking his small hand in hers. "I know, my love. And you are the most special boy in the world, even without a cake." Jake didn't respond. He just nodded, but his disappointment was clear. Emily felt the sadness crash over her, but she forced herself to hold on to her faint smile. She couldn't break down. Not here. Not in front of him. She stood up to throw away the trash, grabbing an extra napkin for Jake. When she returned, he was still sitting there, quietly playing with his straw. The guilt clawed at her. She opened her mouth to say something, to cheer him up, to make him laugh, but before she could, Jake whispered, "I really wanted a cake, Mom." Emily swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. But before she could even try, a voice interrupted her. It was the cashier. "Excuse me, ma'am. Just a reminder, the payment hasn't been processed yet. It's $6.45. Emily froze. Her stomach twisted. She was sure she had paid when she placed the order. Quickly, she pulled out her wallet, flipping through it with growing panic. There was nothing left but a few coins. I thought I had already paid. There must be some mistake, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The cashier sighed, barely hiding her impatience. It's just what's missing, ma'am. Or maybe I made a mistake. Sorry about that. Emily forced an embarrassed smile, but her face burned. She could feel the stares intensify from the other tables. A lump formed in her throat, and all she wanted to do was disappear. Jake looked at her, sensing something was wrong. She rummaged through her wallet one last time. Nothing. A few coins spilled onto the table. And for the first time that day, the smile on her face completely disappeared. What happened next didn't just save Jake's birthday. It started a chain of events that would change their lives forever. Keanu Reeves sat in the corner of a Taco Bell, quietly observing the scene unfolding in front of him. He had come in hoping to enjoy a simple meal in peace, unnoticed. But now, his attention was locked onto a mother and her son, a woman visibly struggling to hold herself together as a waitress stood over her, waiting for an answer she couldn't give. What happened next would change everything. But before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we have another one just for you. The clinking sound of loose change hitting the table echoed through the nearly empty restaurant. It was a tiny noise, but to Emily, it was deafening. Every hushed whisper from the other customers felt like it was directed at her. The weight of their stares burned into her back. Her heartbeat pounded like a muffled drum. Jake leaned forward in his seat, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. His brown eyes, once filled with excitement, were now clouded with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was soft, hesitant. Emily forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart," she lied. "Everything's fine. Just give me a moment." But nothing was fine. She searched her wallet for the third time, her fingers trembling as they ran over its empty pockets. Jake watched her closely, sensing that something was wrong. The waitress, standing impatiently beside them, let out an audible sigh. "Ma'am, you're $2 short," she said flatly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And just a reminder, tips are part of our wages." Her arms were crossed, her gaze locked on Emily's hunched figure. Emily swallowed hard, the sting of humiliation burning in her throat. I thought I had enough," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She placed the remaining coins on the table, desperately counting them again, hoping for a miracle. But the math didn't change. She was still short. Jake, ever the optimist, looked up at the waitress with innocent curiosity. "Can we pay later, Mom? Like when we order food at home?" To him, it was a simple solution. To Emily, it was another reminder of just how little he understood about their struggles. The waitress didn't even spare him a glance. "That's not how it works, kid," she said sharply. "If everyone did that, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs." Her tone was dismissive, cutting through Emily like a knife. Emily took a deep breath, fighting the urge to apologize over and over. I can run home and bring the money," she said quickly. "We live close by. It won't take long." The waitress scoffed. "Ma'am, we've heard that excuse plenty of times. I'll get the manager." She turned on her heel and walked toward the counter. Emily sat frozen in her seat, watching as the waitress whispered something to the manager. The manager barely looked up, then shook his head. Whatever was being said, he wasn't interested in giving her the benefit of the doubt. The waitress returned, her expression even colder than before. Ma'am, she said, her voice rehearsed and impersonal, if you can't pay now, you'll need to leave something as collateral. An ID, maybe. Or, we can call the authorities. Emily's stomach dropped. Call the authorities, she repeated, her voice shaking. It's just, she swallowed, barely able to get the words out. It's just $2. And the tip, the waitress corrected. And yes, we call the police to discourage people from thinking they can just walk out. It's nothing personal. Just protocol. Jake tugged at Emily's jacket sleeve. His voice was barely above a whisper. Are we going to jail, Mom? Emily's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. No, sweetheart, she said quickly, forcing a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course not. I'll handle this. With trembling hands, she rummaged through her bag one last time, hoping, praying, for a forgotten dollar bill, a coupon, anything. But there was nothing. She looked up at the waitress, desperation in her eyes. Please, she pleaded. I can be back in 20 minutes. My apartment is just nearby. I wouldn't do this if I had any other choice. For a split second, the waitress hesitated. But then, as quickly as it came, the flicker of humanity in her gaze disappeared. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said stiffly. I can't take that risk. I've lost enough money that way before. Jake, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, his voice shaking. Today's my birthday, we just wanted to celebrate. For the first time, the waitress looked directly at him. She hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, as if shaking off whatever emotion had flickered across her face, she hardened again. I'm sorry, she said curtly. But that doesn't change the rules. Emily closed her eyes. The frustration. The humiliation. The exhaustion of trying so hard and still falling short. It was all bubbling up inside her. She stood slowly, feeling every judgmental stare pressing down on her. All right, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll leave my wallet here and come back with the money. The waitress shrugged. Fine. But make it quick. Emily took a deep breath and turned to Jake. I'll be back soon, sweetheart, she said softly. Stay right here, okay? Jake nodded, though his small hands gripped his soda cup tightly. She could tell he was scared. Emily brushed a hand through his messy hair before turning and walking toward the door. As she crossed the restaurant, the weight of every stare burned into her back. Jake sat quietly at the table, his fingers clenched around his cup. His shoulders were hunched, his usual excitement completely drained. What neither of them knew was that in just a few minutes, something entirely unexpected was about to happen. Something that wouldn't just save Jake's birthday, but would change their lives forever. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the corner of Taco Bell, hoping to go unnoticed. But as he watched a mother desperately counting her last few coins while her young son sat quietly beside her, his heart clenched. What happened next would change everything. But before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, we have another one just for you. The cashier at the counter still looked irritated when Keanu approached. Without hesitation, he pulled out a $50 bill and placed it on the counter. Can I pay for that woman and her son? He asked softly. And add something special for them, please. The cashier blinked, stunned. It took her a second to register who was standing in front of her. You're. Keanu gave her a small smile and raised a finger to his lips. Shoo, no need to announce anything, he whispered. Just a small gesture. Let them enjoy their day. The cashier nodded, still slightly flustered. Oh, of course, sir. I'll take care of it. Is there anything specific you'd like to add? Keanu thought for a moment, then smiled. Maybe a cake. It looks like it's the boy's birthday. The cashier's face softened. Absolutely. I'll bring it to their table. Keanu gave a brief nod. Thank you. And just like that, he turned and left the restaurant before anyone could notice. A quiet act of kindness, done with no expectation of recognition, only the hope that it would make their day a little brighter. A few minutes later, Emily returned to the restaurant, clutching $2 crumpled in her hand. Her face was still clouded with worry as she hurried back to the table where Jake was waiting. But as she approached, she stopped mid-step. Sitting on the table was a small cake, decorated with whipped cream and colorful sprinkles. A single candle flickered softly on top. Jake sat in his chair, hands clasped together, staring at the cake with a shy but glowing smile. "Mom, look," he exclaimed the moment he saw her. "The lady brought it. She said it was a gift." Emily blinked in confusion, slowly sliding into her seat beside her son. "A gift? From who?" Jake shrugged, grinning. "She just said someone paid for it and that I should enjoy my birthday." Emily's gaze darted around the restaurant, searching for answers. Finally, she called the waitress over, who approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me," Emily began, her voice laced with disbelief. "I stepped out for a few minutes, and now there's a cake on the table. I don't understand." The waitress offered a small, almost awkward smile. "A customer paid for your bill, ma'am. And he asked us to add the cake because it's your son's birthday." Emily sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just heard. "A customer," she repeated. The waitress hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "It was Keanu Reeves," she said softly, as if revealing a secret. Emily's eyes widened. "Keanu Reeves?" The waitress nodded. "He didn't want any attention, but he covered everything before he left." Emily sat frozen, her mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. Keanu Reeves had done this? For them? She turned to Jake, who was happily munching on a piece of the cake, completely unaware of the magnitude of the moment. "Keanu Reeves," Emily murmured, still in disbelief. "Why would someone like him do this?" The waitress shrugged, offering a small smile. "He seemed like a really kind person. That's all." Emily sat there for a long moment, watching Jake enjoy his cake. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Hope. Her son looked up at her suddenly. "Mom, do you think he's a superhero?" Emily smiled, wiping away a single tear that had escaped the corner of her eye. "I think sometimes regular people do things that seem like superhero stuff," she said softly. "And today, I think he was ours." Jake grinned and went back to eating, swinging his legs happily under the table, as if the weight of the world had just lifted. Emily glanced toward the restaurant door, half expecting to see Keanu still standing there. But he was already gone. Gone, but not forgotten. Because he hadn't just paid their bill. He had left behind something much more valuable, a moment of kindness. A reminder that even in the hardest of times, good people still existed. That night, back in their small apartment, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the restaurant. Jake was in the living room, playing with his dinosaurs, humming to himself, a reflection of pure joy. But Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring down at her wallet. The money she had rushed out to get? It was still there. Untouched. She ran her fingers over the worn leather, feeling an overwhelming mix of emotions. Those $2, which had felt like the end of the world just hours ago, now symbolized something entirely different. A second chance. Jake wandered into the kitchen, holding 2 plastic dinosaurs in his hands. "Mom," he said brightly, "today was the best birthday ever." Emily chuckled, brushing a hand through his messy hair. "It really was, champ," she whispered. "It really was." Jake tilted his head curiously. "Do you think that man will come back? The guy with the cake?" Emily let out a soft sigh. "I don't know, Jake. But even if he doesn't, he already did something really special for us. And that's what matters." Jake nodded, satisfied with her answer. Then, after a moment, he grinned. "I want to be like him when I grow up," he said. I want to help people. Emily pulled him into a tight hug, closing her eyes as she held him close. You already are, sweetheart, she whispered. You already are. And that small act of kindness? It was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the simplest gestures can start a ripple effect and change lives forever. Keanu Reeves had simply come in for a quiet meal, hoping to go unnoticed. But when he saw a mother struggling to pay for her son's birthday lunch, he knew he couldn't just look away. What happened next would change the course of their lives forever. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow, we have another special one just for you. Emily stood and hugged her son tightly. And you will, sweetheart. You will. The next morning, after Jake had left for school, Emily tidied up the kitchen, feeling lighter than she had in months. She opened her old laptop, the screen flickering as she scrolled through job listings. But the familiar wave of discouragement returned almost instantly. Low wages. Impossible hours for a single mother. It was always the same. She was about to close the laptop when her phone rang. Emily frowned. She didn't get many calls. Hesitantly, she answered. Hello? Good morning. Is this Emily Carter? A man's voice asked on the other end. Yes, this is she, Emily replied cautiously. Who's calling? My name is Steve Parker. I'm the manager of a local supermarket here in town, the man explained. I was at the same restaurant as you last night and saw what happened. Emily froze. You were at Taco Bell? Yes, Steve said kindly. I was really impressed by how you handled the situation. I know it must have been tough, but you stayed calm and put your son first. That says a lot about the kind of person you are. Emily didn't know what to say. Thank you, she stammered. But why are you calling me? Well, Steve continued, I was thinking. My supermarket is hiring. It's a customer service position with flexible hours and a slightly better than average wage. We also offer benefits, including health insurance, which I imagine could be helpful for you and your son. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You're offering me an interview, she asked, barely believing what she was hearing. Yes, Steve said with a smile in his voice. I'd love for you to come by so we can talk more about it. What do you think? Emily's heart raced. It felt like, for once, the universe was finally working in her favor. Of course, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'd love to. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Steve replied warmly. Just come by tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll send you the address. I'll be there, Emily promised. As she hung up, she stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the news. For the first time in a long while, something good had happened, without her having to fight desperately for it. That afternoon, when Jake came home from school, Emily was waiting for him with a beaming smile. He dropped his backpack on the floor and ran toward her. Mom, why are you so happy? Emily knelt in front of him, holding his small hands. Remember yesterday? When that man paid for our meal and bought you a cake? Yeah. It was the best day of my life. Jake said enthusiastically. Well, Emily said with a smile, I think that day brought us more than just a cake. Jake's eyes widened. What do you mean? I got a phone call today, Emily explained. A man who was at the restaurant last night saw what happened. And he wants to give me a job opportunity. Jake's mouth dropped open. Really, Mom? That's amazing. Yes, sweetheart. If everything goes well, I'll have a new job, one that will help us a lot. Jake threw his arms around her in a tight hug. I knew everything would work out, Mom. It's because of the cake guy, isn't it? He's like an angel. Emily laughed, shaking her head. Maybe he is, Jake. Maybe he is. Across town, Keanu Reeves sat in a modest cafe, sipping a black coffee and reading a book. He had returned to Taco Bell the day before, hoping for a quiet moment of normalcy. But when he saw Emily and Jake in a difficult situation, he knew he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He hadn't expected thanks or recognition. To him, it was just a small gesture, something anyone could do. But deep down, he understood the profound impact that acts of kindness could have. The cafe barista approached with his bill. "Here you go, Mr. Reeves. Big fan of your work, by the way." Keanu smiled politely. "Thank you," he replied. "And you're doing great work here, too." As he watched the activity around him, he noticed the little moments. A father helping his child cut their food. A waitress smiling warmly at an elderly customer who seemed lonely. Small gestures. These were the things that kept the world turning. Keanu placed a generous tip on the table and stood up to leave. Before walking out, he turned back to the barista. "You're doing a great job," he said. "Keep it up." Then he strolled down the street, feeling a quiet sense of peace. He knew he couldn't change the world on his own. But sometimes, all it took was a single act of kindness. And with that, he continued on his way, spreading a bit of light wherever he went. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience. Because sometimes, even the smallest gestures can change lives forever.